Okay. I'd like to call this Marcellus Central School District Board of Education meeting to order. It is 7 p.m. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the next item is presentations. We will go to Mrs. Brantner for that.
Trust me for an hour. I made this surprise you. Good.
Thanks, Patty. We were just getting set over here, sorry. So good evening, everyone. Just some quick updates on what's been happening relative to COVID in our schools. As you know, I continue to update you and the community when we have new cases. Cases are still coming. In some cases, we're fortunate that contact tracing is not required for a variety of reasons. It could have to do with timing. We are asking families and staff members to take a more conservative approach, and if someone is ill in the household, we're asking to keep others home until we're sure that it's not a COVID situation. And I do think that's helping in some cases, but as you all know, the symptoms are in some cases, so tiny that it's easy to sort of ignore or not even realize that they're related to a possible COVID case. So, we're going to continue to ask people to be conservative because it will definitely reduce quarantine, and it'll also, hopefully keep it from spreading outside of school too. Vaccinations are rolling. I know there's been news reports that some folks that had appointments scheduled, they're being canceled due to a lack of supply coming in, but I don't think that's hit us too much yet. Not that anyone's told me. So little by little, I think people are getting appointments and getting vaccinated, and we're actually into second dose territory. So I think more and more we're going to have people receiving that second dose. Just so you know, we're continuing to ask for clarification around, what happens when people are vaccinated, how does it change the landscape? I honestly think that the answers aren't forthcoming because there's still uncertainty about whether or not those who are vaccinated can still be carriers, if you will. So I think as the health departments and gather more information, I think that they'll be better able to give us some guidance. So I'll certainly keep you posted on all of those things, but it's good news that vaccination is happening, and so far so good. I haven't had any. I had my first dose and feeling good, so hopefully it'll stay that way. So in reference to what I was just talking about with how the quarantine will change as a result of vaccines, we do have a little bit of information. We were told that those who've had COVID within 90 days of being exposed are not subject to quarantine. So, for example, if you had COVID in December and you're exposed today, you're considered to have temporary immunity. And so we were fortunate with actually a case that we had last week. We had at least 2 or 3 people that did not have to quarantine because they had already had COVID. So if there's one positive with having COVID, it gives you at least a 90-day get out of jail free card, so to speak. So that came from the county. We have reached out asking for clarification of a possibility of loosening some of the quarantine rules, and that's really based on the fact that it doesn't appear to be spreading at school, and other counties have more relaxed rules around quarantine, and I think they're having sort of the same success that we are. So we are seeking in hopes of being able to lessen quarantine. I think people are starting to get fatigued, especially when they know that it's not changing anything, because kids are not giving COVID to other kids here at school. It's coming into school, but it's not spreading at school. And I know there's starting to be a groundswell in the community of some people who are, they have families, relatives in other counties, and they're starting to compare, and I think are interested in the same thing. So I'll be doing a little bit of work on that this week to see if there's some will in our county to take a look at what other counties are doing and compare success rates. Last week on Friday, we got a little bit of a surprise announcement from the governor's office, and we were receiving the announcement pretty much the same time everyone else in New York State was, which has been a little bit challenging. And that announcement was that his office and the New York State Department of Health were signing off on beginning high-risk winter sports as of February 1st. So the sports we're talking about are men's and women's basketball, wrestling, and hockey. What they sort of didn't make very clear at the moment of the announcement was that everything is really dependent upon the county. They, if you will, kicked the can over to the counties to make a final determination, likely based on what's happening in your particular region. So we are still awaiting the county health department to weigh in on their thoughts around starting winter sports. I did send a message out to families tonight. We tried to do some digesting over the weekend and make sure that we in fact had all the information that was available. And so I basically sent out a message explaining what I'm explaining to you and telling them that as soon as we have further clarification, we will be getting more information out to them. We're trying as a group of superintendents in the region to get an appointment made, hopefully in the next 24 to 48 hours with the folks that will be deciding these things so that we know what their decision is and can try to get a little bit ahead of it. In the event that they sign off and allow these sports to ensue, it'll be a bit of a scramble, but we are somewhat prepared for the scramble to get things started if that's how this falls. So prior to this announcement, John Durkee and I have been working for the last several weeks to really think about what are the possibilities of doing some sort of a show, knowing that there would have to be some modifications, but do we feel like we could do something safely? And we finally, last week, midweek, had a meeting with some of the folks that are in charge of the show normally, and talked through with them, and they're really ready to take this on. I think for John and I, admittedly, our focus is on members of the senior class specifically. This is their last opportunity before graduating to be able to participate with their colleagues, with their classmates in a show, and I feel like we can move forward with this, and it won't be a show that's as large as ones that we've done in terms of the size of the cast. But again, I think that we can still create this opportunity, especially for our seniors and potentially some other members of upperclassmen. And hopefully in a year's time, we'll be having what we consider to be our traditional all-school show. So that's why this evening I'm asking for approval of the positions for the adults that manage the show. And they're ready to put the specifics together and put that forth so that they can get working on it. What I didn't include here in my notes, but I'll add as an aside, we've also been working with our music department to really talk about how we can start doing ensembles in a safe manner. And they have really put together some fantastic plans to bring kids together and do some singing and playing following the guidelines we've been given. I am seeking clarification about how quarantine will work relative to those ensembles. I'm likening it a little bit to physical education. Right now in a phys ed setting, because the social distance is a larger distance than it is in the regular classroom, and it would be the same in an ensemble, I'm wondering if we can follow the same guidelines, and unless you reach that social distance, we are not doing much quarantining in PE. And as you know, as I said previously, COVID's not spreading at school, so that means we're having success. you know, even though kids are playing in phys ed together and following the guidelines, you know, it's not spreading there either. So I'm hoping I'll be able to use sort of that same foundation with our ensembles. And just a little wrap up of testing. So testing did occur on the 14th. We had about 150 staff members tested. It might have been 148, but it was close. And we had no positive cases, which was wonderful news. And at this point, there's no plan. I know we talked at our last meeting about including students. I'm not really sure where the county is at in terms of the next round of testing. And that, I think that's largely because so many resources have shifted over to the vaccine side of things, that there may not be as rigorous a schedule for testing as there was. I will tell you, they've said that for any testing going forward, that the school district will have to provide people to do the swabs. They provide someone to sort of run the results and do the computer work. We already were providing people to register. So Jean and I were handling registrations, and I've talked to a couple people in the community about the possibility of helping us out with swabbing in the event that we do some testing again. But I'll keep you posted. I haven't really reached out to them, and I haven't heard from them. So if I haven't heard in a week, I may just check in and see where we're at. So, you know, again, I think our community, and that includes the school community, school staff, continue to do an excellent job of being partners. I think everybody's doing their job, if you will. You know, we're keeping things clean. I think parents are really helping us by carefully watching their children. I think everybody's doing their best at school to follow the guidelines, and as a result, we've been pretty successful with very little disruption to school. So I'm proud of that and very appreciative. I don't know if anybody has any COVID type questions for me this evening.
Apparently not.
All right.
Next, on to our budget planning update.
Okay, I think Tony is ready to go. I'm gonna let him take the lead.
We'll keep this brief. We do have some updates regarding the state aid outlook. But first, just to go over quickly your budget binder. So I think everyone has in their possession now the infamous budget binder. I know at least a couple of you have shared with me how excited you were to receive them today. So I was equally as excited to hand them out. So just to start first with a brief overview of what's in the binder. So I just highlighted here the revenue section, and those are in sections 4 through, it's hidden on me right now, but I think it's sections 4 through 7 is where you'd find the details regarding revenues. You notice that nothing's in the property taxes section currently. That's because there are still some items that we're waiting for to finalize our tax levy limit calculation for next year. But otherwise, we'll begin populating those sections as the budget process unfolds. And then the next sections, 7 through 15, that's where you find detail regarding all of the expenditures. We're not going to spend any time going through those details tonight. Most importantly, you know, as you do look through the materials, if you have any questions, please reach out and let us know. What I did want to draw attention to tonight, though, is where we're going to start this year, that budget gap that we have to contend with each year. So after we roll forward our budget and gather whatever items we can, whatever information we could regarding state aid, we start out with this value of $562,000. That's at the bottom of the slide here. And so just to talk about a few items specifically for tonight. First, revenues are based on information that's available at this time. And so we're all getting information regarding the governor's budget. So we did receive our aid runs for next year. Currently, the amount that shows in aid runs essentially equals what we are starting out with in this year's budget process. So the number that's the estimate is actually no different than what I had come up with back in December. There's no magic here. It's essentially a flat increase. There are some somewhat confusing components of the governor's budget that were all of our associations that we're affiliated with are still trying to sort out what's going on within the governor's budget proposal. One of the major changes is that they've moved the STAR rebate from it being a completely separate item and rolled that into state aid to schools. And we're trying to understand exactly why that might happen. Whether I'm hoping that it's as simple as this, that any stimulus dollars that are coming from the federal government, the state has to demonstrate what's referred to as maintenance of effort. And so the federal government wants to make sure that they're not going to give money to states only to have states reduce aid to school and then fill that hole with federal money. So that's, the federal government would not see that as a good use of their funds when they're simply filling a hole that's created by states. And so one thought is that they've moved the STAR rebate money into operating aid so that it appears as though we got an increase in state aid. That's just it's speculation best. And what we do know is that if the STAR money were to stay as part of state aid, that's a real problem, because that means that the governor and legislature are now taking control of a number and are able to manipulate a number they've not been able to manipulate in the past. So we are very concerned about that. They've also rolled several expense-based aids into what's referred to as services aid. That's something that's happened every year for at least the last 14 years that I've been involved in this world, in schools. And so I don't think that will hold water, but you never know. They try every year to do that. Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, so taking that STAR money and moving it into state aid, the governor can do that arbitrarily?
Great question. I apparently so. He can at least make that part of his budget. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And so, as you can imagine, Mike, everyone's spinning their heads trying to sort out what's happening here. And ultimately, with the governor's, with the executive budget, there are always pretty significant tweaks in the aid formulas that the governor presents or proposes. Virtually none of them make it to the legislative budget. So they usually fall off along the way. This is New York politics at their best. And so after, I guess, as I said earlier, after 14 years, I don't get very excited about these things. But nevertheless, as I said, our various associations are trying to piece this all together to understand what it means.
And is this STAR money that is supposed to go to homeowners, to taxpayers? What STAR money is he moving?
Good question. So either a homeowner receives a STAR tax credit,
Right,
or they receive a STAR rebate. And so if you've owned your home for several years, you're receiving currently a tax credit. So if your tax bill is $5,000 and you get a $1,000 credit for STAR, you only pay $4,000. And then the state makes us whole and sends us that $1,000. Folks who bought a home in the last roughly 3 years, they're receiving a STAR rebate. In fact, I think that was right when you came to Marcellus. So say 4 years ago. So in Michelle's case, she pays all of her taxes and then the state sends her a check.
that's the way it used to be for everybody. I remember getting that check, yeah.
Yep, that's right. So, so in any case, the STAR money, that your $1,000, those dollars that were being sent back to the district by the state, that's what they've done. They've taken that pot of money and
You
shifted.
can't touch my $1,000.
I don't think so either, but. So it's a good point. So.
The other thing that I think Tony's alluding to is that when he said he doesn't get too worked up over this initial run and some of the magic that's happening, is that often the governor's initial budget tinkers with a lot of things. And we've come to believe that he's either checking to see what people really freak out over, or he's trying to distract attention from something else that he really wants to accomplish. So that's why we don't get too freaked out, because we know there's a little bit of, political wrangling that's happening right now. And so our associations will make sure to draw the line in the sand and say, this, don't even talk about this. And that will at least give, the legislature something to start from.
So the next item that we have to contend with is the tax levy limit calculation. And so the consumer price index that's used to, as part of the calculation for the tax levy limit, was recently released. And I forget what the number was. Say it was 1.3%. It was in that vicinity. And so I think it was Mr. McAuliffe that emailed me or texted me that day and said, well, does this mean that we can only levy up to 1.3%, whatever that number was? And the answer is no, that because it's only one part of the tax levy limit calculation, but it's not the entire calculation. There's another portion that Marcellus is pretty significantly impacted by, and that is the capital exclusion. And so I have a rough idea of where our tax levy limit's going to fall. It'll fall in the roughly 2% neighborhood. And it's sheer coincidence. We call it a tax levy limit, or a cap of 2%. This just happens to be the way the numbers fall. I think the calculation was like 2.02%. There are still a few pieces that we're waiting. We need to get from BOCES before we can finalize that number. And so I think our initial estimate of 2% should hold true throughout the budget. Then the expense side of the budget, there are a few items that we have to make some assumptions about. One is salary increases. So we are just in the beginning stages of negotiations with our teachers association, and none of us could tell you where that's going to land, but nevertheless, we have to make some assumption about salary increases. So we make some estimates there, or some projections, along with health insurance and retirement contribution rates. So those things will unfold as time goes on. There's one notable item that I need to draw your attention to. And so if you look on the table on the right, you'll see at the bottom where it says interfund transfers. So that number that, let's see if I can move this thing around. That number 388,000. So that number up through and including this year has been 258,000. And so your question would be, Tony, why are we adding 130,000 there? So there are two changes that we're making and we're proposing to be made. One is an item that we haven't technically budgeted for in a particular area of the budget in the past, and that's our share of the summer school age handicap program. And that's roughly $30,000 a year. I have, and I'll candor, just never dropped money in that portion of the budget. It's just pulled from other areas like health insurance, if we have a surplus in health insurance. So that 30,000, I've just made the transfer now, prior to budget adoption. So I think I have pulled it from health insurance down into that line item. So that's just an expense that we've always incurred and will continue to incur. And then there's a balance of $100,000. So those dollars right now are scheduled to go to our food service program. So since the day I started here, we've struggled to maintain a solvent food service program. That struggle continues to this day. It hasn't been ignored. Each year, so when I started here, I think we were charging the food service program for health insurance premiums, so we turned that on. We had a BOCES cost for a shared food service director, and that expense was charged to the food service program, but there was a revenue that came in the form of BOCES aid. That initially was coming back to the general fund. That was put in the food service program. We used to pay for Social Security and Medicare out of the food service program. We then shifted that over to the general fund. So we're doing what we could. We were doing what we could to try to make some form of solvency. I've frankly run out of tricks. I have no more available, and we cannot continue to sustain losses. So many schools budget a transfer to their food service program. Not all schools actually use those funds. This number is set at $100,000 because we're currently about $280,000. We have about a $280,000 deficit, cumulative deficit in our food service program. So we have to fix that. And the only way to do it today is to set up these dollars to go back to that program. Hopefully, within the next 3 or 4 years, the deficit will turn into a surplus, and we'll develop a profitable food service program. But right now, it's just something that has to be addressed. We can't ignore it any longer. So shouldn't say that. As I said, we have not ignored it. We've run out of any other mechanisms to try to address the deficit.
Tony, question. Is our food service program supposed to be self-sustaining? So is it as simple as saying that our revenue for breakfast and lunch and whatever else food service revenue we get does not come close to paying for salaries, benefits, materials, food costs, things like that within food service and only food service?
So correct. That's each year it's going to struggle to be able to say that revenues are supporting expenditures. This past year with COVID, we took a big shot in the arm. This year, I think we actually will probably show a profit this year, only because of some things we've done to get lunches into the hands of many kids as possible.
If every student bought a full service breakfast and every student bought a full service lunch, would we still, would that cover our expenses?
It would, yes.
It would.
Yep. Yeah, that's the challenge in Marcellus for the last several years has been participation. And so it's good news in a sense that moms and dads are packing lunches. They're sending lunches with their children. That's not so good news to show a profitable food service program. Our participation has been between 30 and 35%.
Ouch.
You usually need about 50% minimum to maintain
Break-even.
School districts that have higher rates of poverty, where students are really relying on food service for breakfast and lunch, have less of a sustainability problem. But if you have a situation like ours, I don't know a district that hasn't had to take the measures that Tony's describing. It's a very typical thing. It's very hard to plan for participation. You have to have people there to make the food and serve the food, and some days you make more than others. I mean, it's just a very difficult thing to do in a sustainable way. And, to Donna's credit, she's done everything possible to reduce staff and still get the job done. And it's, we're still struggling and hoping things will continue to rebound.
It sounds like it needs to be the other end. It needs to be increased participation.
Right.
Cost cutting is down to bare bones, it sounds like.
We've been working on the participation.
Somehow increase participation.
That's what's saving us right now, is that we've been able to, because breakfast and lunch are free for the, the near future. And that's helped with participation. Once that goes away, I don't know where we'll land.
Then the very last item here is just the New York State budget in general. It's not just this year, it's next year and the year after. So we have a multi-year problem on our hands as far as the state's budget is concerned. Heavily dependent on what happens with stimulus money. And one thing that we have to pay close attention to is that the governor withheld or is reducing aid to Marcellus by about $1.4 million next year. But then it's being backfilled with federal stimulus money. That federal stimulus money is a 3-year allocation. So we're going to take a 1-year reduction in state aid and fill it with the same dollars, but to be spread out over 3 years. That's a problem. So there's a lot to watch. There are red dollars and blue dollars and green dollars flying all over the place in these aid numbers, and so we just need to be cautious. And this is what the actions that we take today. We're talking about impacting the school district for 10 years. Say this is going to be a long battle, and so it really is incumbent upon all of us now to make sure that we do the right things going forward.
So some of what you'll hear based on what Tony just shared would be they're suggesting a strategy that if you don't need to take the full allocation, the full backfill allocation in this year, save as much as you can to mitigate next year and the year after. That's a strategy. Some people will want the full shot so that they can ride for another year, using the philosophy that at least for next year, the kids are going to have the very best we can offer to them, rather than reducing that revenue number, that backfill number, holding on to some of it and increasing our gap.
I thought Tony just said that the backfill was over the next 3 years.
But it's $1 amount.
So we get $1.4 million backfill,
Right.
but that's in year
450,000 year one, 450, 450.
Exactly. That's up to us to decide.
Oh, that's up to us.
That's up to us. So one strategy would be see what you can do to carve some of that out and hold it over. Like right now, what Tony's given you is an estimate. The gap in the budget is based on us taking the cut and using the full backfill in year one. We would be whole. That's what he's saying. But we have decisions to make. What if we only take half of it? That basically means you add $700,000 to our gap, and the gap now becomes $1.2 million.
Right, but after this year, if we don't spread it out, there is no backfill.
As of right now, there is none.
So the cliff is next year.
Right. You're either pushing the cliff off or you're mitigating the cliff by taking a multiple year hit. And again, some speculate there's going to be more stimulus money coming. So why create panic?
When you say more, do you mean more after this projected 1.9 trillion?
That's what some people will speculate that is the case.
More after that?
Correct.
There's
So the reason that we're talking about this in this way is to say to you, it's really too early for us to make decisions. I know it feels like, oh my goodness, we got to make some decisions, but it's too early for us to go too far down the road because everything you do has implications.
But it's not too early to talk about it and to discuss it.
Right, not too early to talk about it and discuss it, but there's more information yet to come. So we're going to continue to reveal to you as we learn more. I think Tony's probably done more webinars on the governor's budget in the last 3 days than he would care to admit. And hopefully we'll learn more soon.
This is the same slide from last meeting, our process from now until April, so we don't need to go here. Recognition.
Any other questions for Tony?
Doesn't sound like it. Now to recognition. Back to Michelle again.
Yeah, I just had one. I know that I sent this information to you and probably out to the district, but wanted to publicly recognize Ryan Riefler, our maintenance staff, and then our community partners, NICEAG and HMI and Day Automation. We had a really challenging situation with the heat at KCH. It necessitated us to go virtual for a day, and I was very worried that a day was going to turn into 2 or 3 days, and they really worked tirelessly to get the repairs made and get us back online. So it was a great partnership and dedication from those folks to help us out. So just thanks to all of them. Mike?
Great.
I have one other recognition as well. I would also like to recognize Ryan for taking what I believe was the bottom of the scoreboard up on the football and soccer field and repurposing it. It says Marcellus, home of the Mustangs, repurposing it to over the bay doors on the maintenance building. As you come into Marcellus down Gorge Road, first thing you see is "Welcome to Marcellus," big and bright on that building. And I just thought it was a great repurposing of a resource and a really nice addition to the campus. So good job.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Next is residents' comments. Do we have any residents' comments, Tony?
Grab my phone.
Uh-oh.
It's not likely, but I'm going to check. We have no comments.
Okay, on to business. 6.1, extension of memorandum of agreement. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the extension of the memorandum of agreements with the Marcellus Employees Union and the Marcellus Transportation Employees Union. Do I have a motion?
Motion. Mike.
Mike?
Kelly, motion. Second.
Okay. Any discussion about this? Okay, all in favor? Now remember, we're going to do a round robin on this one. All in favor?
Kelly, aye.
Dean, aye. Janine, aye.
Mike, aye.
Mike M. Aye.
Yep. I'll just go left.
And Patty, aye. So motion carried. Personnel, resolve the following personnel items be approved, and you can read through those. May I have a motion, please?
Motion,
Motion.
Janine.
Oh, okay, Janine. Second,
Second.
that was Mike McAuliffe, right?
Mike, I'm sorry.
All right, anybody, any discussion or questions on this? Okay, all in favor?
Kelly, aye.
Christine, aye. Janine, aye.
Mike B, aye.
Mike M. Aye.
Okay, aye for me. So that's 6 and motion carries. Consent agenda. Resolve that the consent agenda consisting of the following items be approved. May I have a motion, please?
Motion.
Janine.
Was that Janine first?
Christine.
Christine, okay. Second,
Second, Michael.
okay. Any discussion on this? All in favor?
Kelly, aye.
Christine, aye. Janine, aye.
Mike B, aye.
Michael M. Aye.
Aye for me. Motion carried. Information item, board meeting format status.
So just a reminder to everyone that at this point, we're deciding to remain virtual. I think we said we would at least tentatively go through March. Obviously, we can change that at any time.
Okay. Anybody, any other comments on that? Our next resident comments, Tony, I'm assuming none?
Still none.
Okay. 11.1, resolve that the meeting in public be adjourned and executive session to be convened for the purpose of discussion of employment, history of particular personnel, collective negotiations, and pending litigations. May I have a motion, please?
Motion Janine.
second Kelly,
Okay, any discussion here? All in favor?
Kelly, I.
Christine, I. Janine, I.
Mike B. I.
Michael, I.
And I for Patty. Motion carried. So we are entering executive session at 7:41.